giving a clear definition to what sin is can be a bit of a challenge. And I put that challenge before my Sunday morning congregation here a few weeks ago. I was quite impressed with the responses they gave back to me. And there were different aspects of it, but the thing that became very clear to me is that they understood that sin has a lot to do with one's personal relationship with God. And the fact of the matter is that sin for one is not necessarily sin for everyone, because God knows us so well. He knows what would be detrimental and destructive for each and every individual. And the Spirit of God may have come to you and told you something that you should not do, you should not partake of it, because you and your character and makeup, you're not prepared to handle that. And so to disapprove or have God disapprove of what you are about to do because you've had a rebellious heart toward God, that would be sin for you. Whereas on the other hand, someone else may say, that's not an issue for me. And they have their own issues. So sin has to do very much with just being obedient to God, as God would speak to you. Now understand that there are laws and principles. That takes us to the Old Testament and what God speaks to us or spoke to them in the Old Testament days about His Word, about His law. But I find it to be interesting that even before the law that was given to Moses, there was an understanding as to what God would be pleased with. Now, if you go to the Bible and go to your concordance, look up the word sin and find the first place in the Bible you find the word recorded. Chapter 4. I found that to be interesting. All the way to chapter 4, we find the word sin, and it has to do with the story of Cain and Abel. And what God was saying to Cain was simply this, that if you do well, and if you are obedient to God, then you will be okay. But if not, this is what God said to Cain. He says, sin lieth at thy door. Now, that just simply says this. God was reading Cain's heart, as only God can. And God knew what was in the heart of Cain. And, of course, it was proven in the realm of his sacrifice that he brought to God that God was not pleased with. But then I think about, again, what James has to say about this. In his writings, he says, when lust is conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And we'll deal with this later on in the week. But the fact of the matter is that sin was lurking in the heart of Cain. God knew it. And that sin took root and grew. That brought him to the point to where he murdered his brother. You see, that's the way sin is. And that's why in dealing with sin is we have to take authority over it, which goes back to our confession. This is Pastor Jack King with the gospel on the radio broadcast.